fella, right? Okay, so notice here, you got some dialect that starts to happen.
Why, it never made no difference to him. He bet on anything. Dang this feller. Parson Walker's wife laid very sick once for a good while, and it seemed as if they weren't going to save her. But one morning he come in, and Smiley up and asked him how she was, and he said she was considerable better. Thank the Lord for his infinite mercy, and coming on so smart that with the blessing of Providence, she'd get well yet. And Smiley, before he thought, says, well, I rest 2.5 she don't anyway.
Top of page 578.
This year Smiley had a mare. The boys called her the Minute Nag. But that was only in fun, you know, because of course she was faster than that. And he used to win money on that horse, for all she was so slow and always had the asthma or the distemper or the consumption or something of that kind. They used to give her 200 or 300 yard start and then pass her underway. But always at the fag end of the race, she'd get excited and desperate-like and come cavorting and straddling up and scattering her legs around limbers, sometimes in the air, sometimes out to one side among the fences, and kicking up more dust and raising more racket with her coughing and sneezing and blowing her nose, and always fetch up at the stand just about a neck ahead, as near as you could cipher it down. And he had a little small bull pup that to look at him, you'd think he weren't worth a cent, but to sit around and look ornery and lay for a chance to steal something. But as soon as money was up on him, he was a different dog. His underjaw began to stick out like the forecastle of a steamboat, and his teeth would uncover and shine like the furnaces. And a dog might tackle him and bullyrag him and bite him and throw him over his shoulder 2 or 3 times, and Andrew Jackson, which was the name of the pup, Andrew Jackson would never let on but what he was satisfied and hadn't expected nothing else. And the bets being doubled and doubled on the other side all the time till the money was all up, and then all of a sudden he would grab that other dog just by the giant of his hind leg and freeze to it. Not chaw, you understand, but only just grip and hang on till they throwed up the sponge, if it was a year. Smiley always come out winner on that pup, until he harnessed a dog once that didn't have no hind legs, because they'd been sawed off in a circular saw. And when the thing had gone along far enough, and the money was all up, and he come to make a snatch for his pet Holt, he see in a minute how he'd been imposed on, and how the other dog had him in the door, so to speak, and he peered surprised. And then he looked sort of discouraged like, and didn't try no more to win the fight. And so he got shucked out bad. He give Smiley a look as much as to say his heart was broke, and it was his fault for putting up a dog that had no hind legs for him to take a holt of, which was his main dependence in a fight. And then he limped off a piece and laid down and died. It was a good pup, was that Andrew Jackson, and would have made a name for himself if he'd lived, for the stuff was in him, and he had genius. I know it because he had no opportunities to speak of, and it don't stand to reason that a dog could make such a fight as he could under them circumstances if he hadn't no talent. Always makes me feel sorry when I think of that last fight of his and the way it turned out.
Now you probably know somebody in your own life, you could jot this at 3B if you'd like, who loves to tell stories. And the way that they tell the story, excuse me, the storyteller approach is an important part of why you like the story. It's not just the story itself, but it's the way you tell the story that makes it so much fun. If you want, you can jot down at 3B somebody in your life who was the best storyteller that you ever heard. Twain is trying to capture some of that as he tells about this guy named Smiley. Notice he introduces Smiley by saying 2 things about him. One, the guy loves to bet. He'll bet on anything, right? So for example, even somebody's wife is dying, and when they come in the morning and he asks, how's she doing? I think she's going to get better. He said, I'll bet you she doesn't, and she's dead before the end of the day. So already, I mean, you kind of learned something about Smiley already. He's one of these guys that loves to bet. Also, he's had a couple of animals that he's used that he likes to bet with, right? So for example, a pony that doesn't look like he can run very well, but at the very end he'll win the race, or a dog that kind of looks like he can't win in the fight, but then in the very back end of the fight he always grabs hold of the other dog's hind leg and grabs hold and won't let go until he fought against a dog that didn't have hind leg, and then of course he lost, and then he broke his heart, so the dog dies. All of this is the setup now for the real story. We're now going to hear a story about a frog that Smiley had that he liked to bet with for this frog. So here we go. The story of the frog and the jumping frog at that.
Well, this year Smiley had rat terriers and chicken cocks and tomcats and all them kinds
Top
of
of
things.
page 579.
So you couldn't rest, and you couldn't fetch nothing for him to bet on, but he'd match you. He catched a frog one day and took him home and said he'd calculated to educate him. And so he never done nothing for 3 months but sat in his backyard and learn that frog to jump. And you bet you he did learn him too. He'd give him a little punch behind, and the next minute you'd see that frog whirling in the air like a donut. See him turn one somerset, or maybe a couple if he got a good start, and come down flat-footed and all right like a cat. He got him up so in a matter of catching flies and kept him in practice so constant that he'd nail a fly every time as far as he could see him. Smiley said all a frog wanted was education, and he could do most anything, and I believe him. Well, I've seen him set Dan'l Webster down here on this floor, Dan'l Webster was the name of the frog, and sing out, "Flies, Dan'l, flies!" And quicker than you could wink, he'd spring straight up and snake a fly off from the counter there and flop down on the floor again as solid as a gob of mud and fall to scratching the side of his head with his hind foot as indifferent as if he had no idea he'd been doing any more than any frog might do. You never see a frog so modest and straightforward as he was, for all he was gifted. And when it come to fair and square jumping on a dead level, he could get over more ground at one straddle than any animal of his breed you ever see.
Top of 580.
Jumping on a dead level was his strong suit, you understand? And when it come to that, Smiley would ante up money on him as long as he had a red. Smiley was monstrous proud of his frog, and well he might be, for fellers that had traveled and been everywheres all said he laid over any frog that ever they see. Well, Smiley kept the beast in a little lattice box, and he used to fetch him downtown sometimes and lay for a bet. One day a feller, a stranger in the camp he was, come across him with his box and says, "What might it be that you've got in the box?" And Smiley says, sorter indifferent like, "It might be a parrot, or it might be a canary, maybe, but it ain't. It's only just a frog." And the feller took it and looked at it careful and turned it around this way and that and says, "So 'tis. Well, what's he good for?" "Well," Smiley says, easy and careless, "he's good enough for one thing, I should judge. He can outjump any frog in Calaveras County." Feller took the box again and took another long, particular look and give it back to Smiley and says, very deliberate, "Well," he says, "I don't see no pints about that frog that's any better than any other frog." "Maybe you don't," Smiley says. "Maybe you understand frogs and maybe you don't understand them. Maybe you've had experience and maybe you ain't only an amateur, as it were. Anyways, I've got my opinion, and I'll risk $40 that he can't outjump any frog in Calaveras County." And the feller studied a minute, and then he says, kinder sad-like, "Well, I'm only a stranger here, and I ain't got no frog, but if I had a frog, I'd bet you." And then Smiley says, that's all right. If you'll hold my box a minute, I'll go and get you a frog." And so the feller took the box and put up his $40 along with Smiley's and sit down to wait. So
Now, let's make sure we understand the storyline, or the end of the story is not going to be that funny to us. So Smiley has this frog that he noticed learnt how to jump, right? He taught how to jump. And so he can make this frog jump up and catch flies, jumping higher or farther than any other frog. And so now he's met this new guy in the camp who says, "What you got in the box?" And he says, "I got a frog that can outjump any frog in the county." Calaveras is the name of the county. And he says, "Well, I don't know about that." He says, "I'll bet you $40 that I got a frog that can Yeah, I'd do it if I had a frog, but I don't have a frog. I apologize." Smiley says, "Hey, don't worry about it." Hands the frog in the box to the man and says, "If you will watch my frog, I will run out and grab a frog for you, and we can bet." And the guy says, "All right, if you can find yourself a frog." Now, some of you are already smiling because you're already going to begin to gesture at what happens next, right? Of course, this is the genius of Twain even though you kind of know what's coming, you still want to read it just because it's kind of fun to watch somebody get a little bit jacked up. Watch this.
Oh, he sat there a good while, thinking and thinking to himself. Then he got the frog out and prized his mouth open and took a teaspoon and filled him full of quail shot, filled it pretty near up to his chin,
BBs,
and set him on the floor. Smiley, he went to the swamp and slopped around in the mud for a long time, and finally he catched a frog and fetched him in and give him to this feller and says, "Now, if you're ready, set him alongside of Dan'l with his 4 paws just even with Dan'l's, and I'll give a word." Then he says, 1, 2, 3, get! And him and the feller touched up the frogs from behind, and the new frog hopped off lively, but Dan'l gave a heave and hoisted up his shoulders so like a Frenchman, but it weren't no use. He couldn't budge. He was planted as solid as a church, and he couldn't no more stir than if he was anchored out. Smiley was a good deal surprised, and he was disgusted too, but he didn't have no idea what the matter was, of course. Feller took the money and started away, and when he was going out of the door, he sort of jerked his thumb over his shoulder so at Dan'l and says again, very deliberate, "Well," he says, "I don't see no pints about that frog. It's any better than any other frog." Smiley, he stood scratching his head and looking down at Dan'l a long time, and last he says, "I do wonder what in the nation that frog throwed off for. I wonder if there ain't something the matter with him. He appears to look mighty baggy somehow." And he catched Dan'l by the nape of the neck and hefted him, and he says, "Why, blame my cats if he don't weigh 5 pounds," and turned him upside down, and he belched out a double handful of shot. And then he see how it was, and he was the maddest man. He set the frog down and took out after that feller, but he never catched him. And here Simon Wheeler heard his name called from the front yard and got up to see what was wanted. And turning to me as he moved away, he said, "Just sit where you are, stranger, and rest easy. I ain't going to be gone a second." But by your leave, I did not think that a continuation of the history of the enterprising vagabond Jim Smiley would be likely to afford me much information concerning the Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, and so I started away. At the door I met the sociable Wheeler returning, and he buttonholed me and recommenced. "Well, this year Smiley had a yaller one-eyed cow that didn't have no tail, only just a short stump like a banana, and..." However, lacking both time and inclination, I did not wait to hear about the afflicted cow, but took my leave.
Now what Twain did that really marked him as the genius, and it will explain the drawing on page 582. If you turn your page to page 582, just turn one page. Look at that drawing on 582. It's a comic from this time period, right? There is a time to laugh, and there is a time to weep. Drawn as Uncle Sam. Lying in the bed, of course, is Mark Twain. And drawn as Uncle Sam, kneeling, weeping. America loved Mark Twain and loved his comedy. And on his passing, millions and millions of Americans saddened because they loved to read his stuff. Any kind of new piece of writing by Mark Twain was always welcomed with all kinds of excitement, because he had that ability to understand human nature. Let's go ahead now and exegete this story about a guy who has a frog that can really jump well. They put the other guy puts little BBs, buckshot, in the frog so that the poor frog can't jump, and that's how, Smiley loses his bet. It's a silly story. Let's start there at level 1. It is a silly story. It's a story about a guy who loves to bet and loses the bet because he is fooled, right, by another man. So at level 1, it's a pretty simple story. But it does beg the question at level 2A, what point about humans does Twain seem to be making in this story? Let's jot down a few here at 2A, all right, real quickly. These are possible messages of a story like this, right? One possible message, obviously, is that people are easily fooled. Especially people who are kind of not so smart. Okay? So Twain will point out Smiley likes to bet, but he never ran into a guy who had the intelligence to be able to fool him. And the minute that he did, he loses, right? So people are gullible is sometimes a good word to use here. People can be very gullible. A second understanding of human nature is that we can study this story as an analysis of different types of people. There are some people who just are very competitive. They want to bet on everything. Do you, at 3B, have somebody in your own life that you could jot down who is always wanting to bet, always trying to win a bet? Everything is about, I'll bet you, I'll double dog dare you kind of thing, right? These kinds of people have a certain kind of temperament, very competitive, always want to make sure they're right. They don't like it if they get fooled or get made fun of, right? They like to make fun of other people, but they don't like it if it's, what is that line? They like to dish it out, but they don't like it back. Maybe you know somebody like that in your own back. Maybe you're one of those people that kind of like that. You like to make fun of other people. You don't like people making fun of you. That kind of thing, right? Okay. Right? A third and final possible message for this story is that in the end, there is a certain kind of legitimate karma in the universe. Things seem to kind of work out a certain way. And sooner or later, you had to know Smiley was going to get his. And sure enough, it happened. The universe has a way of balancing itself out, right? Okay. At 2B, we already saw this. Let's point it out again, though. This idea of dialect. Find your favorite example of dialect. Some of you, for example, just that very final line on page 581. Well, this year Smiley had a yeller one-eyed cow that didn't have no tail, only just a short stump like a banana. And so you have this ability to kind of capture the dialect, the nuance of dialect. And you could probably point out, notice he catched instead of he caught, and on it goes. Again, Twain has a really good ear for dialect, and he's able then to kind of play that game of spelling words in such a way that when you read them, you're going to read them in the form of regional dialect, right? Okay. All right, let's turn to 3A really quickly. What is your favorite movie or TV show about a practical joker or a practical joke? Somebody who's kind of a comic. What is your favorite funny movie or TV show? What's your favorite comedy? If you have one film that for you is the funniest movie of all time, what would that be for you? Write that title down really quickly, okay? Finally, at 3B, what do you want to say about your favorite practical joke? What is the best practical joke that you ever had played on you? What is the best practical joke you ever played on somebody else? Right? So, practical joking happens better if somebody is a little bit more capable of believing. Right? So, for example, my windows remained open, that back door to the book room was unlocked and not pulled to, and a wind came through, and all of a sudden the door pushed open. And I had a bunch of freshmen in here. And I was lecturing, and I just looked up as the door went, and students heard it, but they didn't, pay attention to it. And all of a sudden I went, oh, yeah, sure, you can come on in. No, that's fine, just come on in. No, we don't mind at all. And all the students turn around to see who I'm talking to, and there's nobody there. And then I say, no, it's fine, come on. I'm happy that you're back joining us again. Hey guys, I just want to introduce you to, and then the students are like looking, and then they're looking back at me, and they're just kind of freaking out, right? And as long as I can act like it's not a joke, right? That's what makes practical joking work. What was the best practical joke you ever pulled on somebody? Do you have one that you pulled on somebody? In other words, you totally fooled them. They thought you were serious, and you weren't serious. Well, there you go. An introduction to the great Mark Twain and his famous frog story. Thank you.